Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to another episode of 100 Yards of Football. I'm Harper LaBelle, along with Vincent Turner, our host and founder, and Jeremiah Long, who's our producer and engineer. And thank you, Jeremiah, for all that you've done to help put this show together. Today, Vincent, we get to talk about one of the great quarterbacks and considered by many to be the best quarterback in the 1970s. Yes, you could think of Johnny Unitas finishing his career then, or Terry Bradshaw taking over. You had Ken Stabler in the reins right there. Craig Morton left AFC, Roger Staubach, et cetera, et cetera. But today, we're going to talk about a man who's got to be a part of that conversation in one Bob Griese.
I think when you think about Bob Griese, and good morning, Harp, is that a lot of people don't give his respect on his name. This guy was truly, in my opinion, one of the best quarterbacks that played the game in the 70s. And when you think about Purdue University, and you think about all the great quarterbacks that came out of there, I don't want to jump gun, but I think about Bob Griese, I think about Len Dawson. I think about Drew Brees. I think about Jim Everett. And I say, you know what? I say nobody hardly mentions the young man out of Evansville, Indiana, and Bob Griese. But let me tell you something. It's an honor and a pleasure to talk about him today because you want to know why? You want to know why, Hawk?
Tell me
He's
why.
the only quarterback 17-0 to win the Super Bowl. And it don't look like nobody going to ever break that record. Back to you, Hawk.
Yeah, unbelievable. So many things to talk about. And we'll discuss a few of them here. Born on February 3rd, 1945. In Evansville, Indiana. His father's name was Silverius. He went by the nickname Slick, and his mother was Ida Griese. So the two of them raised young Bob up when he was just a little guy. He loses his father, who was a plumber, when Bob was 10 years old. So life changed for this young man. Sports became an endearing and very important part of his young life. Baseball, basketball, and a little bit of football to throw that in there. He carried that out all throughout his high school days. In fact, the baseball career was a great one. He pitched well at Purdue, and we'll talk about that in a second. But there was one year where he pitched in the American Legion. He took the young team that he had when he was 18, probably 17 years old in that area. They went to the American Legion World Series. They didn't win the World Series, but they qualified for it. And they said that when he pitched that year that he didn't lose. He was undefeated. He hit .330 even in college. So he's a very good baseball player. He could play basketball in high school as well. He went to Rex Mundy High School, which didn't make it much long after Bob ended up graduating. They had some enrollment issues there, and so it was a small school, and Bob, as a freshman, ended up starring in so many different ways. He had 12 varsity letters by the time that he was finished. Football, basketball, baseball, all 4 years for each one of them. There's your 12. He had a great football career. He scored over 900 points when he played basketball for the team during the 4 years. And obviously, as I mentioned, a baseball player, he could have probably been drafted and gone that way, but he decided early and often that that was going to be a road that he wasn't going to take. It was going to be football that was going to take him through his early years. And he ends up going to Purdue. And Vincent, what a difference maker he made as a Boilermaker.
Turned that program around. When you look at the mid-'60s, when I think about Bob Griese, I think about that young man he had in the backfield with him, Leroy Keys. And I think about when Purdue came on the map, 1965 against number one ranked Notre Dame. The Notre Dame team that had Alan Page, Rocky Bleier, Jim Lynch, Super Bowl champion with the Kansas City Chiefs. But I think about that game because Bob Griese went 19 of 22. Purdue upset Notre Dame, and the rest is history about Purdue football. And then think about 1967 when they beat USC in the Rose Bowl. He was the guy that now today, when we talk about Purdue football, we don't mention Rob Woodson too quick. We don't mention Drew Brees too quick. We mention Bob Griese because he was the guy that turned that program around, the Boilermakers. Back to you, Hawk.
Yeah, he was an All-American there at Purdue, and they end up in 1967. They win the Rose Bowl on January 1st. He was a runner-up to Steve Spurrier as a Heisman Trophy winner. But here's the thing that fascinates me, Vincent, that I didn't even know this. I mean, I knew that from his high school days that he played 3 sports, but he did at Purdue as well. Think about that. Not many people play 3, let alone 2. So as a guard on Purdue's basketball team during the 3 years that he got to play there, because remember, everybody, that back in those days, as a freshman, before the 72 season, you could not play. You could only play your sophomore, junior, and senior years. So he scored over 900 points as a basketball player. He went 12-1 one year as a pitcher on the baseball team. He hit 330 that same year. So they didn't isolate you to just one position like many players are isolated now. If you could pitch, and you could also play right field when you weren't pitching because you could hit, he was the Shohei Ohtani of his day, I guess you could say. But obviously, as a quarterback and a kicker and a punter, he did all of that. In high school, he even sold popcorn at halftime just to make some extra money for the school. But as a Boilermaker, what a difference maker he was in so many different areas as a great athlete. And there was no issue that he was going to get drafted. It was just going to be a matter of where and when. And here's the thing about the draft, Vincent. Back in '66, it was a dual league draft where the AFL and the NFL held separate drafts, and they did so in many cases right after the season was over. In some cases, it was in December. At the end of November or the first week of December. The leagues were starting to consider merging, and the '67 draft was proof of that. The Miami Dolphins, who were an expansion club from an earlier year, ended up getting a couple picks, and Bob was picked number 4 overall in 1967 when both leagues drafted in the same year for the first time. So here he is, the number 4 guy overall. Bubba Smith went number 1 in that draft, but Bob goes to the Miami Dolphins, and that's really where his career starts to blossom.
I want to go back. Purdue University, a lot of people don't understand this. I think Purdue is the number 10 school in the country as far as academics. Been on that campus in West Lafayette, and let me tell you something. When you go on other campuses, you see kids mingling and kind of having fun. They serious about their business at Purdue. And I heard Mr. Griese was also a Big Ten academic All-American. You got to be really a serious student to attend Purdue. But you mentioned the 1967 draft, and you mentioned Bubba Smith was number 1. Out of all the drafts that's really been in our great lifetime, think about who was in that draft. George Webster, Floyd Little, Alan Page, Mel Farr, Gene Upshaw, Willie Lanier, Rayfield Wright, Ken Houston, Lynn Barney, Larry Little, Jan Stenerud, Coy Bacon. That's some firepower there, man.
Yeah.
That's some serious, serious talent. And for Mr. Griese to come out of that draft as a quarterback, see, God don't make no mistakes. Talent, well, he went 17-0. It's the only undefeated quarterback in NFL history. Back to you, Hall.
Well, the draft was loaded with talent, and obviously many of the players that you mentioned either enjoyed Pro Bowl or eventually Hall of Fame careers, and Bob was certainly a part of that. It didn't start out great, though. Vincent, one of the first things that I noticed is, hey, Bob, wait a sec, 67? Hold on a second. That 71, 72, 73, that was a little bit in the distance between those years. So 67, he's drafted. The Dolphins were struggling. It wasn't a great organization, at least not at that time. George Wilson was the head coach, and he was fired after the '69 season. Even though there were a lot of really good players there, George didn't do a good enough job with them, and Joe Robbie ended up firing him and bringing in some young kid who had been in Baltimore and had lost Super Bowl III and kind of was in the outskirts with the ownership, the Rosenblums in Baltimore, and that's one young Don Shula. Shula was offered 10% of the Miami Dolphins and a $70,000 a year salary to take over in 1970. So it was very unusual that would be a part of the package but obviously Shula jumped on it, and everything started to change for Miami afterwards. Now, Rosenblum had an issue with that, and he went to Commissioner Pete Rozelle and said, hey, these guys were tampering, and that is not allowed. They didn't ask for permission, and I didn't want to fire Shula. I wanted at least an opportunity to visit with him and negotiate it. So Rozelle ends up penalizing them and giving a number 1 draft pick to the Colts in order to compensate them for the loss. But Don Shula helped change very quickly an organization that already had a tremendous amount of talent. There was Larry Little there. There was Larry Zonka that was there. There was Bob Kuchenberg. You had Nick Bonacani and several others that were already there at that time. And Shula ends up blending them together. And the sky was the limit for that young Dolphin organization. They quickly started to turn things around.
The game that really took it on for me was Christmas Day, 1971, in a real battle with the Kansas City Chiefs, who had came out winning the Super Bowl that year, which today is still the longest game in NFL history. And when Miami won that football game, they got over the hump. That same year they went to the Super Bowl, they lost to the Dallas Cowboys. Come back the next year, they go undefeated. And what I respect about their organization, and most of all, they picked up Paul Warfield, added another veteran. They had Jim Kick. They had Mercury Morris. But think about their Super Bowl undefeated season. Griese got hurt, I believe, in the 5th game that year. Earl Morrall came in, 38 years old, and I believe won, 8 straight. And then they brought Griese back to the championship game. And remember all the hoopla. How can Coach Shula do this? How can Coach Shula do that? Bringing Bob Griese back. But I knew going into the Super Bowl against the Washington Redskins, they weren't going to win that football game unless they had Bob Griese. And when you look about Mr. Griese today, he was one of the most accurate quarterbacks throwing that slant. He was a guy that had a great mind for football. He was a guy that played very poised. In the Dolphins, that's how they played when he was with that team. Running game, we're going to pound you. But Mr. Griese is going to make a play in the passing game. It's going to be very accurate. And he was a guy, even after they won that Super Bowl, remember the Dolphins came back and won back-to-back. And without him under center, I don't think they would be talking about them being undefeated and back-to-back Super Bowl champions. I'm going to tell you, people, and Mr. LaBelle, you played at a high level. There's been a lot of great quarterbacks and put up a lot of great numbers. Brady, Patrick Mahomes, what he doing now. But I'm going to tell you, this man right here out of Evansville, Indiana, he's one of the best that's ever been under the center. And if I had to have a team today, I would like to have the model of Bob Griese. He don't get a lot of publicity. He don't get a lot of hoopla, but go back and look at his record and look at him as a player. Back to you, Mr. Harper LaBelle.
Yeah, I remember that Super Bowl 7 probably as vividly as any one game when I was a kid that really jumped out at me. I remember watching Super Bowl 5, and that was at the end where Jim O'Brien kicks the field goal that Baltimore beats the Cowboys. Well, the following year, the Cowboys get in Super Bowl 6, and they beat the Dolphins. I remember in that game, Griese running about 450 yards on one scramble, where he ends up losing about 35 yards on the play. And I'm, oh, no, I can't believe that. And I don't remember who I was rooting for then. I don't know if I was probably 7 or 8 years old. But I know that I was rooting for the Redskins. I don't know why. I just did. I rooted for the Redskins. And they kept calling them the old Redskins. And George Allen loved having veteran players. And he used the line that said, at that time, I think the roster size was 43. He goes, 43 men all in agreement, can't be beat. Let's go Redskins. And they ended up losing because guess what? The 43 guys on the other team were united, and they were very good too. It was probably one of the more boring games if you think about it. Lots of punts, lots of we can't do this. We're not going to get a first down. But 2 touchdowns versus really 0 for the Redskins. The defense there for the Dolphins shut the Washington Redskins out in terms of the offense scoring. The only points that the Redskins got was on a blocked kick. Gary Premian bounces the ball off his head. Was it Mike Bass?
Yes, sir.
Mike Bass ends up picking up the ball and taking it in for a touchdown. And now I'm thinking the Redskins got a chance, but no way. The Dolphins defense was too good. So well-rounded. He didn't need to win the game. He had so many guys around him. The three superstars in the backfield with Jim Kick, with Larry Zonka, Mercury Morris, with the speed to the outside. It didn't always work for those guys as a group when contract times came around, but the Dolphins were the winningest team from a percentage-wise of any professional organization during the 70s. And people may forget that. The Raiders kept bragging about how they were that team, but no. The numbers indicate Raiders were second. So congratulations to Bob on not only getting through the first Super Bowl loss, but getting his team back there. And the picture on the bottom right where they just dominated the Minnesota Vikings, made the Vikings look like, what the heck are we even doing here? We can't do anything on offense, and defensively we can't stop them. So the domination, the amount of players that ended up being Pro Bowlers and Hall of Famers, Vincent, so impressive. So the 70s really, in many respects, belong to the Miami Dolphins.
Bob Griese, I'm very honored today we're doing him. And as I said before, I don't have no more else to say about him. This guy was a tremendous football player. Words can't describe what he means to the National Football League. And as you mentioned, Harper, in the 70s, when you was watching football at our age, well, I'm a little older than you, the Dolphins were at another level, man. And Bob Griese and that football team, they kind of set the tone for what we at today as we talk about the great playoffs that's going on. And my final thoughts about Bob Griese is that there was a gentleman by the name of Don Brewer, and he was out of Flint, Michigan. He put this band together, Grand Funk Railroad, and they had a hit, boy. I don't need a whole lot of money. I don't need no big fine car. I got everything a man wants. Bob Griese got everything he wants down there in Miami, 17-0. Back to you, Mr. Harper LeBel.
Grand Funk Railroad. Man, you are bringing up the AM gold, aren't you, with that one? Well, one of the things that Bob had to deal with, as we mentioned earlier, is injuries. And then the 72 season, he ends up getting hurt, but is not really out for the entire year. He's able to come back late in the year, play in the playoffs, and lead them to the Super Bowl. Earl Morrall, the old crew cut guy, ends up just filling in. But, what a great job he did as well, just managing the game. They were going to run. They're going to run some more if you need. Sometimes they weren't even throwing more than 15, 16 times a ball game. So completely different mindset in terms of the offensive game plan, the coordination, and the philosophy. But Bob took advantage of that. Injuries in 72, 77, 78, he was hurt. Tearing ligaments, breaking bones, all that kind of stuff. And in 1980, that was his last year of playing. He had Don Strock and David Woodley, who were the heir apparents to the Miami Dolphins. And Bob in week 5 ends up with a shoulder injury. He had come off the bench to help the Dolphins to win a couple of games, ends up hurting his shoulder, and he decides to retire after that. Joe Robbie asked him in 81 to assist with Strock and Woodley as an assistant coach, and he did. And Bob did a good job of helping those guys start their careers and move them forward. But he decided that it was going to be a little bit too hard on his family. The time to coach, the extended long hours was a little bit too much for him. So he ended up retiring from football, and then he gets into broadcasting. And what an amazing career that he had in that realm. 1982, he worked for NBC. He was with Charlie Jones. He ended up doing a Super Bowl with them. In 87, he joins ABC. In 99, in 2001, and in 2005, he calls national championship games. In January of 1998, he calls the Rose Bowl game. I believe that was Dick Enberg, and that was his son Brian's last game at the University of Michigan, who, by the way, had an undefeated season and a national championship. He joined ESPN in 2009. He worked for 2 years with them, and he retired from broadcasting in February of 2011, right around his birthday. He has suffered tragic loss with his first wife, Judy. He has since remarried. His 3 boys, and Brian, of course, was a NFL caliber quarterback. He was national champion at Michigan, and he had a broadcasting career as well. So the two of them are really close, aren't they, Vincent?
Hey, what can you more say? Proud father and son, man. I mean, you think about it. You get to broadcast your son's national championship game at a prestigious program, Michigan, in the Big Ten, a school that you competed against. And I remember when Michigan won the national championship, they was on the field. I had just moved to Atlanta. I was working at the Run and Shoot, working as a weight room monitor. They had the big television screen. And I remember Brian Griese did something that sent chills through your body. You're a father, you have a son, Harp. And I remember Brian Griese. When he won the national championship, he had that rose in his mouth. And he looked up there at the press box where his dad was, and he looked at his dad, number one, baby. Pointed at his dad, and Bob Griese, they came back to him in the box, and he broke down. You can't get no better than that.
Yeah.
You cannot get no better than that. And I'm going to leave it with Mr. Griese. He's a Sigma Chi. Brad Pitt, Tom Selleck, Woody Harrelson, David Letterman, Bill Buckner, the crazy man, Bobby Valentine, Johnny Orr, Pig Stewie, Eddie Sutton, Hank Stram, all them his frat brothers. Back to you, Hart.
Well, he remarried after he lost his wife. Her name is Judy. So his second wife, Shay, they live in Florida. They also have a place in North Carolina where they'll reside. We mentioned Brian. He has a grandson, Jack, who's the son of his son Scott. And he is a running back at the University of Virginia. So the athletic career, even though he stopped playing, in the Griese family continues on. So congratulations to that. Let's look just at a little bit. The numbers in the Super Bowl games that he played, they were behind, so they had to score a lot of points. He threw 23 passes, completed 12 for 134 yards. He had one interception in the Super Bowl loss. Against Washington the following year, this is 1972, he was 8 for 11. And that's it. They only threw 11 times, guys. And in the Minnesota game the following year, he was 6 for 7. So 85% completion percentage, but only 73 yards. So it's not the numbers. It was the championship, I think, and the leadership, as you mentioned, Vincent. 63% completion percentage in terms of his Super Bowl career. But let's look overall. He played in 161 ball games. He started 151, 56% on his completions back in those days. He threw for over 25,000 yards. He rushed for 994. He had an additional 7 touchdowns rushing. He had 192 as a passer. And the leadership again, Hall of Fame for the NFL, Hall of Fame for college football. He ended up with a passer rating of 77.1. But most importantly, three Super Bowls played, 2 championships. He was a 2-time All-Pro. 6 times he got to play in the Pro Bowl. He was the passing touchdowns leader in 1977. He won the Jim Thorpe Award, the Burt Bell Award. He has won numerous other awards. He's in the Dolphin Hall of Fame. Samuel Ball Trophy is another one that he won. He was a consensus All-American at Purdue. What else can you say other than Bob Griese led a fantastic football life, and we are so much better because of it?
Final words about Bob Griese. Drop the mic. One of the best football players to play the position of quarterback. I don't have no more words to say about him today. It's been an honor. One more time, a pleasure. And just when you think about old school football in the era that I grew up in, watching football, watching the 70s, the Miami Dolphins, the 72 team that went undefeated, there's something that's never going to leave my memory. And we lost the great Mercury Morris a couple of months ago. And Mercury Morris always said at this time, he breaks that champagne bottle open. He says, 17-0. You can't defeat that. Grand Funk Railroad, Bob Griese. I don't need a whole lot of money. Back to you, Mr. Harper LaBelle.
Well, back then they didn't make anywhere close to the money that they're making now. They probably made in a career what some guys are making in a single ball game, and that's been on forever. But congratulations, Bob. You were a fantastic high school, college, and professional football player. You were #1 draft pick. You're a 2-time Super Bowl champion. You're a Hall of Famer. What else can we say other than we pay tribute to you and we thank you for all that you did to make the game a little bit better than what it was when you first got there. So that's a look at Bob Griese, ladies and gentlemen. We appreciate and are grateful that you are a part of the show. So for Vincent Turner, our owner, founder, and co-host, along with Jeremiah Long, our producer and engineer, I'm Harper LaBelle saying thank you for tuning in to another episode of 100 Yards of Football. We appreciate you being a part of the show today, everybody. Have a great day yourselves, and God bless Bob Griese.